So, Richard, the announcement of the passing of Stephen Vaughn was his son put it up on social media this week. Obviously, the Vaughan family have featured on Crime World before, probably because of Danny Vaughan, but who was a very well-known boxing trainer with MTK and a supporter of Daniel Kinahan. But tell us a bit about Stephen, his brother, who probably be less known to people over here.
Stephen was a very well-known boxing promoter. He comes from a very well-known family who have links to the sport dating back over a century. They have been well established on Merseyside, known as boxing promoters, and very, very an integral part of the Merseyside fight game.
And obviously, Stephen Vaughn also came to the attention of, I suppose, of the media for his involvement in football. And his involvement in football was controversial because he was at least linked into criminal activities.
Yeah, although he was never actually prosecuted, his name did crop up repeatedly, particularly during the Operation Crayfish, which was Customs and the then Regional Crime Squad investigation into Curtis Warren. He and Warren had known each other from childhood and were apparently, he admitted, quite close friends. And it's a friendship that continued into adulthood. But obviously in these circles, if you are getting mentioned with the likes of Curtis Warren, then you're going to come under investigation yourself.
So that, Richard, then led to, at the time he was a stakeholder. I think it was in was it Barrow AFC or
Barrow Football Club, yeah.
And that became a big source of controversy because he while at Chester, I think at a later point, I think he became the first person ever to fail the FA's fit and proper person test, a controversial test that many have passed. But Stephen Vaughn fell foul of this.
Yeah, well, it may be an apocryphal story, but it goes that Curtis Warren took a helicopter flight looking for land and property to develop. And as he flew over Barrow FC's ground, he said, see that down there? I own that. Now, this information eventually got back to Customs and the crime squad, and they began looking into Barrow Football Club and its individuals, and that's where the link with Stephen Vaughn came from.
And as you said, Richard, it never went anywhere. No criminal prosecution was ever brought. And Stephen Vaughn went on, I think, to move to Malta and became involved in football. And you see, in fairness, very fulsome tributes to him coming from Malta then for his involvement in football. So he was a controversial character, but he had his supporters, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, everyone you speak to, he was very well liked. He was good company. And it was just because of some of the company that he did keep. But no, very well respected, very well thought of in the fight game. And it's, as you said, never prosecuted, although he did obviously come under the inspection of the authorities on a number of occasions.
Yes. So I suppose that's Stephen. But his brother, Danny Vaughan, was somebody that appeared in the Sunday World and on Crime World, not because of his involvement in crime, but because he became one of the public faces, I suppose, of MTK Global. As people will know, MTK Global was founded by Daniel Kinahan, along with Matthew Macklin. It obviously became very controversial because of Daniel Kinahan's involvement. Ultimately, he would formally step away, in theory, from MTK Global, though he continued to have a lot of involvement with boxers signed to MTK Global. And when Daniel Kinahan formally stepped away, he handed over the business. He sold the business, he said, to a woman called Sandra Vaughan, who was married to Danny and would have therefore been Stephen's sister-in-law. Now, Sandra Vaughan, also a controversial character, to say the least.
Yeah, Sandra Vaughan, prior to becoming Sandra Vaughan, was Sandra McClumper. She made a substantial fortune with her involvement in a company called Fake Bake. Fake Bake, as the name suggests, is a fake tanning company, which had very, very high-profile customers, Madonna included. Sandra McClumper, Glaswegian, was somebody who was highly skilled in business world and made very, very effective business dealings.
Yeah, and of course she became, she was a very close friend of Daniel Kinahan. There's no doubt about that. She ultimately, I think, met Danny Vaughan through the boxing world and got married. And then Sandra Vaughan, I suppose, started to appear in all the Irish papers initially, but ultimately in the UK papers as well, as not just a business person, but I suppose the primary cheerleader for Daniel Kinahan. I remember there was one extraordinary interview, really, where she berated the Irish public, and in particular the Irish media, for not being proud of Daniel Kinahan. I think it was in 2020. I always remember that, her saying, would you not be proud that someone from inner city Dublin actually is sitting at the table arranging these fights? And of course, it rang strange, because at that time, Daniel Kinahan certainly was somebody who was under investigation from multiple law enforcement agencies for organised criminality at the very highest level.
Yeah, I think with Sandra Vaughan, she played a very savvy game, because the top table at world boxing is quite small, and you obviously need to make associations with everyone in that hierarchy. But I think also the fact that before she became Sandra Vaughan, her partner was a guy called Kevin Kelly. And Kevin Kelly was a small-time drugs dealer who ended up being kidnapped and tortured over a 4-day period in Spain after falling out over a drugs deal with the Kinahans. So it's interesting that years later, she's standing alongside Daniel Kinahan and supporting him and backing him.
And standing behind him at a very high level. There's a famous picture of Daniel Kinahan and Sandra Vaughan meeting with a senior official of the Pakistani government. I mean, they were very much business partners. Now, Sandra Vaughan has no links to criminality, but she became, of course, she ran a campaign boycotting the Irish media, and she really became the face of that. Danny Vaughan as well, even after he was I think he was the first person after the sanctions were placed on Daniel Kinahan to come out and post a picture of them together, talking about loyalty and all of that. So they really backed them all the way.
Very much. I remember hearing those quotes from Danny saying about loyalty to Daniel Kinahan, and that picture. I think it was taken in Dubai with Sandra and the Pakistani high-ranking official. So they've never backed away from being vocal in their support for the Kinahans. That's clear.
So in terms of the boxing, the MTK Global, obviously, when the sanctions came shortly after it, it all fell apart. It effectively shut its doors. Had MTK Global made much inroads in the UK. We know they had such a huge role in Irish boxing for a period of time. But they really did seem to have a huge presence as well across England and Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, this has been highlighted before, but certainly the influence and the power annoyed a lot of the more established boxing promoters and trainers, because the power of their influence took a lot of the fighters away from these people to join MTK. And it didn't go down well, but the amount of money they were offering, the support, and also the bouts that they were able to arrange to get these young fighters on headline events, it was very, very easy choice for the fighters to say, no, I'm going to MTK Global.
Yeah, I mean, there was huge money being thrown around. Obviously, then the what was happening in Dubai was much more of a mystery in terms of the registration of the companies. What Daniel Kinahan's involvement in the boxing world was. There was a sort of cloak thrown over it by the nature of doing business there. But we did ultimately, as the sanctions were laid, there was sanctions laid on a company called Dukashu Consultancy, and it was a company that the American government targeted. And Sandra Vaughan again was, on her own LinkedIn had named herself as a being a part of this company.
Yeah, I mean the company was identified by the Americans, as you said, Niall, and it again had clear and very, very evident links to the Kinahans. So it's another connection between the Vaughans and the Kinahans.
Now we know Daniel Kinahan has certainly at a certain time. He was all over social media, not necessarily on his own account, but there was boxers putting up pictures of him over in Dubai. Sandra Vaughan was also very public. Shortly after the sanctions, things went really quiet. Has she reappeared in Scotland, or is there still mention of her anywhere?
It's been noticeably less evident. She is involved in a very luxurious 5-star health spa, for want of a better expression, in Glasgow. The various treatments being offered, but there has been a noticeable reduction in the number of times she's popping up in the papers or on TV. Now, I don't know if this is to do with what's happened to Daniel Kinahan, but I think that that has been noticeable, certainly.
And Danny Vaughan remains very heavily involved in the boxing world. I think he's still training fighters and involved in various promotion companies.
Yeah, again, very successful, very well thought of. He has brought a number of top flight fighters through. All of them give him credit for the training, the advice that he's given them. He's in with several fighters who have topped bills in recent years, and clearly is a very influential and very well thought of character in the boxing game.
Yeah, he's particularly involved with this company called Falcon Sporting Promotions, and a lot of that is focused on this Pakistani fighter called Mohammed Falcon Wasim, a very talented fighter himself. Now, Danny Vaughan as well, he has himself come before the courts. I mean, there's a lot of controversial moments in all of these people's careers that we're talking about, but he famously was done for benefit fraud.
Yeah, I think that must have been about 10 years ago. Him and his then partner, not Sandra Vaughan, were done. They claimed to be living apart. I think she was alleged that Danny Vaughan was only a landlord when in fact they were cohabiting, and they both got convicted for the fraud. Quite minor in the grand scheme of things, but it's certainly there that it happened whilst Stephen was probably more well known in the press than his younger brother.
Yeah, I mean, it was a significant enough money, but as you, in terms of, I think it was £125,000 over a number of years. But exactly in the scheme of things, a sort of white collar crime, I suppose.
Yes, yeah.
Now, Stephen, has he been buried? The funeral hasn't been held yet, but there's been a lot of tributes coming in from him, from his son as well, Stephen Vaughn Jr., who was also a professional footballer and had, played for some semi-pro clubs across the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear from the number of tributes that Stephen was very well liked, very well thought of. Had a lot of friends, not just in the boxing and footballing world, but in the business world. And a lot of people have come forward to pay tribute to him. So it's clear that he was very well thought of, very well respected, and had a lot of influence, not only in football and boxing, but in business dealings across the Northwest.
So again, it just shows you there's boxing and controversial business people. They do seem to go together. It just seems to be part of the sport. Yeah,
very much so. I mean, these people mix at events, they mix at parties. You get VIP ringside tickets for boxing, or you get corporate hospitality at football. It's always happened, and it always will happen.
Okay, Richard. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll try and come back to the story maybe after the funeral.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.